The smell of wet earth is what brings it back. Not the rich, dark loam of the Pacific Northwest, heavy with pine needles and the promise of rain. This is different. This is the smell of the high desert after a sudden monsoon, a scent of clay and creosote and ozone, ancient and sharp. I'm standing in the frame of a house that isn't a house yet. My hands, my jeans, my boots, all coated in a thick, reddish-brown adobe mud. The sun is setting behind the Jenez Mountains, bleeding purple and gold across the vast New Mexico sky. And for a moment, I feel a profound sense of peace. A peace so deep, it feels like it's part of my bone structure. And then, that scent of wet earth hits my nose, and the peace fractures. For a split second, I'm not here. I'm 24 years old again, standing in a sterile, air-conditioned office in downtown Portland, Oregon. The smell in that room was of new carpet, industrial cleaner, and the faint, sickeningly sweet scent of the potted orchid on the receptionist's desk. It was dying. Its roots were rotting in a decorative pot with no drainage. An irony so cruel I could only appreciate it years later. In my hand is a single piece of paper, a property deed. My name is nowhere on it. My brother's name is there, signed in his confident, sloping script, and next to it, the name of a corporation I've never heard of. My vision tunnels. The polite hum of the office fades into a roar, the sound of blood pounding in my ears. I can feel the phantom weight of my life's work, binders full of ecological surveys, architectural plans, financial projections, my entire soul pressed onto paper. And I realize it's all been turned into a ghost. An elaborate stage play to facilitate a theft so complete, so intimate, it felt less like a crime and more like my own organs were being surgically removed without anesthesia. The woman at the county clerk's office is looking at me with pity. "Ma'am?" she asks, her voice gentle. "Are you okay?" I look down at my hands. They're trembling. Not with anger, not yet. That would come later, a wildfire that would burn for years. No, this is the trembling of a building whose foundations have just been liquefied. The trembling of complete and utter collapse. That's the moment, the beginning of the end, and the end of the beginning. It all comes back with the smell of wet earth. But today, I can hold it. I can look at the memory, turn it over in my hands like a smooth, dark stone, and then I can put it back in my pocket. Because the hands that trembled in that office are the same hands that are now building a house out of the earth itself. They are steady, they are strong, and they are finally mine. Before the collapse, my life was green. That's the only word for it. I grew up in Seattle, a city that lives and breathes under a canopy of green and a blanket of soft gray cloud. My childhood wasn't about video games or shopping malls. It was about the woods behind our house. My grandmother, Nana Rose, would take me there. She didn't teach me the names of plants from a book. She taught me their stories. This one, the Salao. Its berries fed the Coast Salish peoples. This one, the bleeding heart, its flower looks like a perfect pink teardrop. She taught me that the forest was a community, a complex, interconnected society of roots and fungi and decaying matter that fed new life. It was a world of quiet, constant miracles. My brother, Ethan, never understood it. He was 2 years older, pragmatic, brilliant, and always focused on the path of least resistance to success. While I was pressing flowers in old phone books, he was teaching himself to code. While I was volunteering at the local arboretum, he was winning debate club trophies. Our parents, both hardworking accountants, adored him. He was quantifiable. His successes were clear, linear, and easy to explain at dinner parties. I was their artistic, sensitive daughter, a puzzle they loved but didn't quite know how to solve. The only person who truly got it was Nana Rose. When she and my grandfather retired, they bought 100 acres of abused farmland in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. It was a wreck, overgrazed, stripped of its native flora, the creek that ran through it choked with invasive blackberries. Everyone saw a liability. Nana Rose saw potential. "This land is tired, Maya," she'd tell me, her hands deep in the soil of her small vegetable garden. "It just needs someone to help it remember what it used to be." That became my dream, my life's purpose. I went to the University of Washington and enrolled in their renowned landscape architecture program, specializing in ecological restoration. Every paper I wrote, every project I designed was for that land. I wasn't just getting a degree, I was training for a calling. I spent my summers down in Oregon, taking soil samples, cataloging the few remaining native species, and drawing up plans. I called it the Meadowlight Sanctuary. It wouldn't just be a restoration project. It would be an educational center, a place for community gardens, a seed bank for native plants. It was a vision so clear in my mind I could taste the wild strawberries and hear the bees humming in the camas lilies. Ethan, by then a rising star at a Seattle consulting firm, was surprisingly supportive. He'd look over my rudimentary business plans and chuckle. "Maya, your passion is your superpower," he'd say, ruffling my hair. "But you need someone to translate it into a language the money people understand. Let me help you with the boring stuff. The LLCs, the grant proposals, the bank loans. You just focus on the green stuff." I was so grateful. It felt like for the first time, he saw my dream not as a quaint hobby, but as a viable future. He was my big brother, my protector, the one who navigated the sharp-edged world so I could live in my softer, greener one. He became the co-owner of the LLC we formed, a necessity, he explained, to secure financing. I handed over everything: my research, my designs, my meticulously crafted 5-year plan. I trusted him completely. The way you trust the sun will rise, the way you trust the ground beneath your feet. It wasn't even a question. It was a fundamental law of my universe. Nana Rose passed away in the spring of my senior year. Her death was a quiet, expected thing, a gentle fading. Her one condition in her will was that the Oregon land could never be sold to a commercial developer. It was to be held in trust for her wild-hearted granddaughter. Holding her worn gardening gloves in my hands, I made a silent promise to her and to the land itself. I graduated with honors and moved down to a small rental cabin near the property, ready to pour my life into making Meadowlight a reality. Ethan handled the estate from Seattle, dealing with the lawyers and the final paperwork. "Just a few more hurdles, May," he'd say on the phone. "The county is being a pain about zoning, but don't worry, I'm handling it. I'm using your environmental reports to show them how valuable this project is." I didn't think twice. I spent my days on the land, clearing invasive ivy, planting test plots of native grasses. I was covered in dirt and sweat, and I had never been happier. I was living the life I was born to live. The first crack in my reality appeared as a registered letter. It was a notice of public hearing for a new development project called Blackwood Estates. The address listed was my land, our land. I called Ethan, my heart hammering against my ribs. He laughed it off. "Oh, that's just a clerical error," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I told you, the county is a mess. I'll get it sorted out tomorrow. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it." But the sick feeling didn't go away. It coiled in my stomach. The next morning, I drove the 2 hours to the county records office in Portland. I asked the clerk for the property file. She slid a thick folder across the counter. And there it was, the deed, the new deed, signed a month ago, my brother's signature, and alongside it, the name Blackwood Development Corp. I flipped through the file, my hands shaking so badly I could barely read. Annexed to the sale agreement were dozens of pages of supporting documents: my ecological survey, my water table analysis, my list of non-endangered native species that could be safely relocated. My own work, my labor of love, had been twisted into a tool to bypass environmental regulations. He hadn't just sold the land. He had sold my soul along with it, using my own passion to grease the wheels of its destruction, a direct violation of our grandmother's dying wish. I stumbled out of the office and into the piercingly bright sunlight. I sat on a bench, the deed clutched in my hand, and I tried to dial his number. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages. He answered on the second ring, his voice breezy. "Hey May, what's up?" "You sold it," I whispered. The words felt like swallowing glass. There was a pause. The breeziness vanished, replaced by a cold, flat tone I had never heard before. "I knew you'd find out eventually. Nana's will was sentimental nonsense, Maya. It wasn't legally ironclad. I had it reviewed. Commercial developer is a vague term. Blackwood is a planned community builder. They specialize in sustainable luxury homes. It's not a strip mall." The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. "Sustainable? You're building McMansions over a protected wetland. You used my research." "I used our research," he corrected me, his voice hardening. "The research you did under the LLC that I financed? Face it, Maya, your little sanctuary was never going to make money. It was a pipe dream. I got us 7 figures for a piece of useless dirt. I secured our future. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you?" The world tilted on its axis. "You erased me. You erased Nana's memory. This wasn't about money, Ethan. This was my life." "Well," he said, and the finality in his voice was absolute. "Maybe you need to get a new one." He hung up. I sat on that bench for hours, watching the people of Portland walk by, living their normal lives. My own life had just been detonated, and the world hadn't even paused. The foundations were gone. The trust, the love, the shared history, all of it was a lie. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had revealed that the person I thought he was, the brother I loved, had never existed at all. The ground beneath my feet wasn't just shaking anymore. It had vanished completely. I was in a freefall, and I had no idea how far down it was to the bottom. The bottom was a drab second-floor apartment in a forgotten corner of southeast Portland, with beige walls and a window that looked out onto a perpetually damp brick wall. The collapse wasn't a dramatic, cinematic event. It was a slow, quiet, suffocating rot. I couldn't go back to the cabin. I couldn't go near the land. I couldn't even look at a tree without feeling a physical wave of nausea. My life's passion had become the source of my deepest trauma. Plants, soil, the very things that had defined me were now triggers. It was as if a concert pianist had suddenly developed a violent allergy to the sound of a piano. My world shrank to the four walls of that apartment. Depression is not sadness. Sadness has a shape, a cause. Depression is the absence of everything. It's a grayscale vacuum. I stopped eating. Sleep was a battlefield of nightmares or a black void I couldn't climb out of. I lost weight until my clothes hung off my frame like a scarecrow's. I'd sit on the floor for hours, tracing the patterns in the cheap linoleum, my mind a static hum. Friends from college would call. I'd let it go to voicemail. My parents called, confused and worried. Ethan had fed them a sanitized version of the story. Maya was having a difficult time adjusting to the real world. The project was too stressful. He'd made a tough business decision to protect her. They tried to mediate. "He put the money in a trust for you, honey," my mom said, her voice tinny over the phone. "It's a lot of money. You're set for life." I remember laughing, a dry rattling sound that scared me. "He didn't put the money in a trust for me," I told her. "He put it in a cage, and he wants me to thank him for the food pellets." They didn't understand. To them, the logic was simple. Land was sold, money was made. Ethan was practical. Maya was emotional. The story was as old as our family itself. I stopped answering their calls too. Loneliness became my only companion. It was a physical presence in the room, heavy and cold. My life's work was gone. My family ties were severed. My own identity felt like a phantom limb, still aching where it used to be. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. I thought about ending it. The thought wasn't violent or dramatic. It was quiet. It felt logical, a simple solution to an unbearable problem. If I am nothing, then becoming nothing is the next logical step. What stopped me was a weed. One morning, after a week of living off stale crackers and tap water, I was staring out at the brick wall opposite my window. In a tiny crack between two bricks, a single defiant dandelion had taken root. It had grown horizontally, reaching for a sliver of sunlight, its yellow flower a tiny, absurd explosion of color in a world of gray and brown. I stared at it for a long time. It had no business being there. It had every reason to give up. Yet there it was, surviving, reaching for the light. I didn't have a spiritual epiphany. I didn't suddenly feel a rush of hope. All I felt was a tiny, microscopic flicker of curiosity. I put on my shoes, went outside, and bought a cup of coffee from the cart on the corner. It was the first time I'd left the apartment in 2 weeks. The coffee was bitter and hot, and it felt real. It was a small anchor in the formless void. That dandelion didn't save my life, but it showed me it was still possible to have one. The fall was over. I was at the bottom, and the only way out was up. The ascent wasn't a climb, it was a crawl. The first step was admitting I couldn't do it alone. I found a community mental health clinic that offered therapy on a sliding scale. My first therapist was a kind, tired-looking woman named Dr. Anya Sharma. I sat in her office, a box of tissues between us, and for the first time I told the whole story. I didn't cry. I recited the facts like a police report, my voice flat and detached. She listened patiently until I was done. Then she said something that cracked open a window in my beige-walled prison. "It sounds like you're grieving a death," she said, "but the person who died is you, the Maya who existed before the betrayal. It's okay to mourn her. Permission to grieve." It was revolutionary. I had been trying to either fix myself or erase myself. The idea of simply mourning was a third path, so I let myself mourn. I mourned the girl who loved the forest, the girl who trusted her brother, the girl who believed in the inherent goodness of the world. I mourned my own naivete. Slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild. The process was unglamorous. It was making myself go for a walk every day. It was learning to cook a simple meal for one. It was getting a job at a downtown bookstore, a place filled with the quiet rustle of pages and the smell of old paper. It was neutral territory. No plants, no soil, just stories. But Portland felt haunted. Every corner held a memory. The dream of Meadowlight was a ghost that followed me through the rain-slicked streets. I knew I had to leave. I had to go somewhere the ghost couldn't follow. One night, scrolling through my laptop, I saw a picture of the high desert in New Mexico. The landscape was alien, brutal, and beautiful. It was the opposite of the lush, forgiving green of the Pacific Northwest. It looked like a place with no patience for bullshit. It looked honest. I had a few $1,000s left from the bookstore job. The trust fund Ethan had set up remained untouched, a poisonous monument I refused to acknowledge. On a whim, I bought a one-way bus ticket to Santa Fe. I packed one suitcase with clothes and books, left the rest of my meager possessions on the curb, and got on that bus without telling a soul. The first few months in New Mexico were a shock to the system. The air was thin, the sun was relentless, and the silence was enormous. I got a job as a barista, waking up before dawn to serve coffee to artists and construction workers. I lived in a tiny casita with thick adobe walls that kept it cool in the day and warm at night. For a long time, I just existed. I worked, I walked, I read. I felt like a human-shaped space, a blank canvas waiting for a color. And slowly, the landscape began to paint itself onto me. I noticed the resilience of the desert plants, the gnarled junipers, the spiky cholla cacti that bloomed with impossible magenta flowers. They didn't just survive here, they belonged. They had adapted to the harshness, their strength etched into their very forms. One day, on a walk, I came across an old, crumbling adobe wall. I reached out and touched it. The texture was rough, uneven, a mixture of dried mud, straw, and clay. It felt alive, like the skin of the earth itself. It was the first time I had touched anything related to the earth without feeling a pang of my old trauma. This wasn't the soil of my past. This was something new. That touch led me to a community workshop on traditional adobe building. It was taught by an old man named Javier, with a face like a dried apple and hands that were maps of a life spent working with the earth. The other students were young, eager architects and eco-conscious builders. I was just a lost barista. I was terrified, but Javier was kind. He didn't ask about my past. He just handed me a shovel. The first step is always the same, he said with a smile. You make the mud. So I made mud. I mixed clay, sand, water, and straw with my bare feet, squishing the cool, heavy mixture between my toes. Then I learned to form the bricks by hand, pressing the mud into wooden molds and leaving them to bake in the relentless sun. It was hard, physical, repetitive work, and it was saving my life. My hands, which had once been so adept at handling delicate seedlings and drawing fine architectural lines, were now calloused and strong. My body, once frail and neglected, grew lean and powerful from lifting heavy bricks and smoothing plaster. I was physically exhausted every night, but my mind was quiet. The static hum of depression was replaced by the simple, focused rhythm of the work. I wasn't thinking about the past or the future. I was just in the mud, in the sun, in the present moment. I was building something real, something solid, with my own two hands. I was taking the broken pieces of the earth and creating shelter. I was taking the broken pieces of myself and creating a new foundation. The reinvention happened not in a flash of insight, but brick by brick. After the workshop ended, Javier took me on as an apprentice. He taught me everything: how to read the land for the right kind of clay, how to build a wall that breathed, how to sculpt a fireplace that would draw the smoke and hold the heat. Adobe is not like concrete, he would say. It is not dead. It has a spirit. You don't tell it what to do. You listen to it. You work with it. His words resonated deep within me. That's what I had tried to do with Meadowlight, to work with the land. Ethan had tried to tell it what to do, to impose his will upon it. The parallel was so clear, yet it no longer hurt. It was simply an observation. I worked with Javier for 3 years. My life found a new rhythm, dictated by the seasons and the sun. I saved my money. I bought a small, beat-up pickup truck. I started taking on my own small projects: garden walls, outdoor ovens, repairing old adobes in the historic district. My work had a distinct style. It was organic, sculptural. I incorporated curves and niches, respecting the natural forms of the materials. People started calling it living adobe. I never advertised. Work came through word of mouth. I was still Maya, the quiet woman who made mud walls, but I was a different Maya. The hole inside me, the one left by the betrayal, had not been filled. Instead, I had built a new life around it. The hole was part of the architecture of my soul now, and I had learned to live with its shape. One evening, I was scrolling through an architectural magazine online, looking for inspiration for a new project. And then I saw it. An article titled, "Blackwood Estates, the Future of Sustainable Living." My heart stopped. There was a picture of Ethan, smiling, accepting an award. He looked older, more polished. His hair was graying at the temples. The article praised his visionary project in Oregon, highlighting the use of recycled materials, the low-impact design, the thoughtful integration with the surrounding landscape. It mentioned the community gardens and the preserved walking trails. He had stolen my dream, repackaged it in corporate plastic, and sold it back to the world as his own. The old anger, the familiar wildfire, flickered in my chest. For a moment, I was back in that beige apartment, drowning. I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the tremor of collapse. It was the vibration of a tuning fork that has just been struck. I knew I had to go back, not for revenge, not for a confrontation. The idea of screaming at him or exposing him felt pointless, like shouting at a ghost. I had to go back for the 24-year-old girl I had left behind, the one still sitting on that bench in Portland. I had to go back to close the loop. I drove the 17 hours from Santa Fe to Oregon in my dusty pickup truck. I didn't call my parents. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. As I crossed the border from the arid plains of Idaho into the lush green of Oregon, the old anxiety began to creep in. The air was thick with moisture and memories. It felt like I was returning to the scene of a crime. I didn't go to the land itself. I couldn't. Instead, I drove to a state park on a ridge on the opposite side of the valley. I hiked up a familiar trail to a viewpoint that overlooked the area. And there it was. Where the tangled woods and open meadows of my memory should have been, there was a neat, orderly grid of houses. Large, modern homes with big windows and perfectly manicured lawns, all painted in tasteful shades of gray and taupe. I could see the walking trails, paved now, and a large, fenced-in area that must have been the community gardens, Blackwood Estates. I sat there for a long time, looking at it through a pair of binoculars. It was beautiful, in a sterile, predictable way. It was a perfect monument to my brother's philosophy: nature, tamed, packaged, and sold at a premium. I had expected to feel a tidal wave of rage, of grief. I had prepared myself for a storm. But as I sat there, watching the sun glint off the windows of the houses, all I felt was a profound, aching sadness. And then, something else, something unexpected: detachment. It was like looking at a photograph of a stranger's life. I could appreciate the pain of it, the injustice, but it was no longer my pain. The woman who had dreamed of Meadowlight Sanctuary was real, and I loved her, but she wasn't me anymore. Her dream had been rooted in that specific soil. My life was rooted in a different birth now, 1,000 miles away. I saw a family walking on one of the paved trails, a young couple pushing a stroller. They were smiling. They were happy. They had no idea their home was built on a foundation of betrayal, on the ghost of a wild-hearted girl's dream. And I realized with a startling clarity that it didn't matter. My story was not their story. My brother hadn't destroyed me. He had destroyed a version of me. And in the rubble, a stronger, more resilient person had been forced to grow. He had taken my map, but he had forced me to learn how to navigate by the stars. I stood up, took one last look at the perfectly landscaped ghost of my past, and I whispered, goodbye. I wasn't saying goodbye to the land. I was saying goodbye to the hold it had on me. I turned my back on it and walked down the mountain, my steps light. I didn't look back. The drive back to New Mexico felt different. I wasn't running away from something anymore. I was driving home. When I pulled up to my small casita, the adobe walls glowed warm orange in the evening light. My little garden of desert succulents and tough, beautiful wildflowers was thriving. It wasn't the lush Eden I had once planned, but it was mine, and it was real. A few months later, I officially started my own business, Tierra Viva Construction. It's a small company. Sometimes it's just me and a couple of guys I hire for big projects. We build small, sustainable homes out of adobe and reclaimed materials. We build them to work with the land, to respect the sun and the wind and the rain. We build houses that feel alive. The money from Ethan's trust fund is still sitting there. A few years ago, I had a lawyer help me turn it into an anonymous foundation. It provides grants to young ecologists and land artists, the kind of people I used to be. The money is no longer a cage. It's a source of seeds for other people's dreams. I take a small, modest salary from my own company, just enough to live on. I don't need anything more. My life is quiet. It's not the life I would have planned for myself. There is no fame, no grand recognition. My victory is not a headline, it's a feeling. It's the feeling of my hands in cool, wet mud. It's the satisfaction of a perfectly sculpted wall. It's the sound of happy clients seeing their new home for the first time. It's watching the sunset paint the mountains in colors so beautiful they break your heart, and knowing, with absolute certainty, that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Sometimes, a young apprentice, their hands clumsy in the mud, will ask me how I got into this work. They see my passion, the way I talk about the earth as if it's a living relative. They want to know my story, and I tell them, not the whole story, not the dark, painful parts. I just smile and say, I got lost for a while, and I found my way back by learning how to build a home from the ground up. The betrayal was a fire that burned my entire world to the ground. It scorched the earth of my soul, leaving nothing but ash. But in that barren landscape, something new and unexpected was able to grow. Something stronger, something more honest. Something that could only have been born in the aftermath of such a devastating fire. I no longer smell wet earth and remember the pain of that office. I smell it and I remember the gift of the desert. I remember that you can take broken pieces and build something whole. I remember that the deepest wounds can lead to the most profound strength. I remember that a life is not defined by what is taken from you, but by what you choose to build in its place.